is with us to talk about the latest on autonomous rail. So, Harris, how are you doing this morning?
That's it. Good to see you. How are things going for you? Yeah, life's good in Chattanooga?
Yeah. We got great weather. Everything is going great here. How are things going in the autonomous rail space, my friend?
Yeah. So I think we've got a really interesting time period these days, right? The STB is calling plenty of the the STB is calling plenty of the Class 1s together to talk about service and volume and performance. And from what we've been seeing in some of the analyses that we've run, we're seeing a strong negative correlation. Train speeds are down roughly 4% year over year, volumes up about 3% year over year. And the narrative, it continues to be that it's a staffing issue. And so it's brought to bear kind of in the market about, hey, what's the real solution here? If the staffing shortages aren't going to be resolved in the near term, are there alternatives to actually providing better service for the rail network and the customers?
And looking into that, there is a note that the state of New York recently introduced legislation mandating a crew size to be 2 people for most railroads. Is that going to be a net benefit? Is that where if you have a train coming into New York, you need to find another person to hop on board? Or do most railroads simply just roll with one person on the train?
Yeah, so historically, most modern day freight trains here in North America operate with a 2-person crew. So you've got a locomotive engineer and a conductor on board. There's kind of been a looming idea that with the implementation of positive train control, which was a safety measure established many years ago that effectively allows a train to be stopped prior to it passing a signal and potentially engaging into another train, fully remote. So trains effectively in the current setup can be operated autonomously. You don't necessarily need anybody in the head-end locomotive to actually operate the train. And actually in Australia, they are operating trains from the coal mines to other different regions fully autonomously today. I think the effort in the state of New York is to codify the idea that, number one, union jobs will be protected and you will have a certain number of crew members that will be on board to make sure that the trains operate safely, but also that rail service doesn't continue to be a problem, because that's one of the main items that's being pointed out now. Rail service is down. Maybe that's a train crew related or a shortage of workers related issue.
Yeah, so Harris, I was going to bring that up. What is the issue there? Is it kind of like the ILWs, they fight innovation and technology at the ports on the West Coast all the time, which we know we're in dire need of. Obviously, I state my case in Exhibit 1 is the pandemic, right? In truck, couldn't you solve a lot of the service issues by becoming more automated? And what are you going to save by taking one extra person off that train anyways? I mean, you leave them on there as an engineer or the safety valve, if you will, but you can make those improvements as a railroad just through the autonomy, right? And gain those efficiencies and costs.
Yeah, Michael, you raise a really good point. I think there are a handful of different perspectives about what safety really means in the rail industry, and I think the rail industry has a really good job and a high mark for actually performing safely across the entire kind of surface transportation landscape. When we think about what autonomous really does, we see a couple of early stage startups that are deploying their technology in some very limited fashions, right? Intermotive out of St. Louis is doing some very focused work, I think, in kind of the more mine perspective. Parallel Systems out of California's got a more intermodal focused approach. I think the unique things there is you can take people out of the equation, right? You can still operate large pieces of machinery on a closed network and actually have less cost, have less kind of human factors intervention where you potentially could have a derailment or something like that. When I think about that in a much broader scale, which is many years away, you are now walking towards a point where you can operate a good portion of the freight rail network autonomously. The technology is there. Has it been proven out? Has it been validated? Has it been safety tested? No, not yet. But I think we are seeing the early stages of a groundwork where you're going to see a lower cost environment, a higher performance environment, and more importantly, you're going to have a really good opportunity to see autonomous vehicles deployed in a space that is much more predictable and much more controlled than the open road and over the highway.
Looking at potential use cases here, do you see that now that we have a few startups that are going public, now we see that there's application and deployment of the technology, can we use this rail and other chronically underserved areas, or even expand the current rail networks from the major lines from metro to metro? What are some of the opportunities that we're seeing?
Yeah, really good question. So I think one of the things that we see across the intermodal space that we've talked about many times over the past couple of months is the shortage of chassis that exist, quite just predominantly across many different ports or inland facilities, especially with the rail network. If you think about it, chassis oftentimes get out of balance between an origin and destination, meaning they have to be recirculated. That's what tends to lead to a lot of chassis shortages in many of those markets. The way that we're thinking about this is that if you deploy autonomous technology and you're able to keep specific pieces of equipment in kind of local markets where you could go maybe from the port of LA Long Beach and take something directly to the Inland Empire without it having to touch a chassis or require a truck, you're able to keep those chassis in those local markets for longer periods of time, meaning that you're going to get higher utilization, you're going to see fewer shortages, and maybe in kind of a broader, long scale type vision, you could potentially see an environment where you're going from the port of LA to Long Beach, maybe into the inland port in Utah, or maybe in other environments, you're going to see maybe pieces of equipment that are running out of a lumber area or a mine, and they're taking their products directly to a manufacturing facility without requiring a ton of human intervention or taking a ton of assets out of the normal network. And we think that that's actually a net benefit to the overall supply chain because you're going to have fewer shortages of equipment to be able to facilitate the movement of those activities kind of around the North American ecosystem.
Yeah, so Harris, last question here. We're running out. We got about a minute left. Am I hearing you right? Are you saying that the autonomy in rail is almost exact opposite as in truckload, right? Where it would be more useful in the shorter, the feeder type of area and provide that efficiencies more than it will the long haul rail?
Yeah, so I think the thesis is let's prove it out from the bottoms up. Let's prove it out more on a short haul type scenario where you have very closed networks, very practical applications. But the groundwork has already been laid, Michael, to actually deploy this at full scale across the North American ecosystem. We think that there's plenty of opportunity out there. And compared to truck, it's a much safer environment to operate a train on a closed network from LA to Chicago than it is across the highway network. And I think we both know that and both can agree on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent stuff, Harris. I look forward to talking to you again and getting another update on the rail and intermodal. Very interesting stuff. Right now, I'm going to toss it to a quick break.